Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Friday, June the 21st, 2024. We've been talking about slavery this week in response to the Did You Ever Have a Question that I tried to answer in my sermon this past Sunday. Why was slavery okay if God treated everyone with respect? And the basic answer, of course, is slavery was not okay. However, slavery in ancient times and really continuing up almost to modern times has existed in human society. It has always been seen as, well, I shouldn't say that. It's at times it was just merely accepted. It was even argued for, but in our own time, we see it as being something that is bad and if not evil. So I've been talking a little bit about, in particular, the Old Testament, how it looked at slavery, in particular in Exodus and also in Leviticus and also in Deuteronomy. Kind of want to kind of continue those thoughts with a piece that I came across from a rabbi, Lev Mirowitz Nelson, and he wrote an interesting piece called "Does the Bible Condone Slavery?" Again, from a Jewish Old Testament point of view. He says many readers of the Torah, again, those are the first 5 books of the Bible, are shocked and disturbed, he writes, when they discover the seemingly approving references to slavery. Well, yes, the Torah recognizes the existence of slaves and legislates some aspect of their treatment. We even hear about a few individual slaves, including Eliezer, that was Abraham's servant, the handmaidens Bilhah and Zilpah, who gave birth to several of Jacob's sons. In fact, some slaveholders in the American South, and even some rabbis at that time, he writes, referred to biblical laws of slavery as justification for the practice. But for those of us committed to both the Torah and also to ending slavery, which continues to be a global problem today, he acknowledges, this can be a little bit hard to take. And so there's a few ways to make sense of biblical slavery. First, we need to distinguish between the Torah's 2 categories of slaves: the non-Jewish slave and the Jewish slave. The former, the non-Jewish slave, refers to slaves who would remain so for a lifetime. The latter, or the Jewish slave, refers simply to indentured servants trying to pay off a debt or to raise money for their families. The Jewish slave works for a set period of time, as we saw the other day, then goes free. With today's ethical sensibilities, it's easy to argue that we should extend those protections that were mandated for Jews to include all of humanity. We would respond that slavery was a cultural norm in the Bible's time period, but times have changed. And perhaps the Torah, with its mandated release of Jewish slaves and protections for all slaves, for example, by granting a day off for Shabbat, even improves the usual conditions of slaves. He notes that Jacob Milgrom, in his book Leviticus 23 to 27, the Anchor, from the Anchor Yale Bible Commentaries, goes even further, suggesting that the Torah actually tried to make enslaving others very difficult, if not impossible. He writes, for Israelites, both kinds of slavery, chattel and debt, are prohibited. In other words, no Jew may own another person, and strict constraints limit how long a person could be held as an indentured servant before the debt was paid off. And that's especially relevant today. So his analysis, Milgram's this is, centers on Leviticus 25, verse 42, where God says, for they are my servants whom I freed from the land of Egypt. They may not give themselves over into servitude. And so the Talmud even uses that verse as evidence that workers always have the right to quit, that they can't be forced to work beyond the span that they wish to. It's also relevant to note, he says, that later rabbis eliminated the category of the Jewish slave entirely. Rabbi Shimon, I can't even pronounce the name, from the 14th and 15th century, ruled that this legal category ceased to exist after the exile of the 10 northern tribes of Israel. So we kind of noted that a little bit the other day as well. And so, the Hebrew slaves instead of being seen as a slave, could hire themselves out as a worker, and therefore be called a servant, but has not been acquired, may even quit in the middle of the agreed upon time. And so, very important point here that he's talking about, that the Old Testament, even as it seems to condone or at least accept slavery and regulate slavery, has continued to be interpreted down through the centuries, uh, through the rabbinic tradition of interpreting things. And that's kind of interesting. This is sort of a different way of looking at it, but I think about, I've been reading a lot, perhaps you have too, about the Supreme Court is holding back, and we're going to probably get a flood of some of their decisions here. And there's a big argument in terms of interpreting the Constitution. And there are those that I think are called originalists who say, oh, only what the plain meaning of what it was, what the founders meant when they wrote this down. And others have said that, as wonderful a document as our Constitution is and our laws, that it's, I remember learning this as a kid, living, breathing thing, that it has to be always reinterpreted in terms of new circumstances, unique circumstances that didn't exist when it was written. So that's an important point of what this rabbi is saying here. Even the Old Testament, if it says this, the rabbis down through the ages have continued to look at it and to reinterpret it. And so they even got to the point where it basically eliminated slavery for all intents and purposes, even though it's there expressed in the Old Testament. So I'm not going to go into any more of the details there, but this idea that does the Bible condone slavery? Well, the Bible acknowledges slavery, but it lays the groundwork, as I think I suggested in my sermon. It lays the groundwork for people eventually coming to the realization, that this is not a good thing, and to ultimately and eventually abolish it. So we're going to wrap this up tomorrow, talking a little bit about the New Testament and how that kind of the line of thinking, or this heading in this direction that we see coming through the Old Testament, found its fruition, I guess you'd say, in the New Testament. So we'll do that tomorrow. We'll wrap this up. Again, probably more information about slavery in the Bible that you ever wanted to know, but kind of interesting. And we'll wrap it up again tomorrow. Hope you have a great day today. We'll see you then tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.